Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Joylette Portlock. I'm the Executive Director at Sustainable Pittsburgh. We at Sustainable Pittsburgh, with CEOs for Sustainability and Vibrant Pittsburgh, are pleased to share some hands-on resources for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion today. And we are also privileged to hear from a stellar panel of Chief Diversity Officers who are leading the charge at their organizations. Of course, our virtual convening today is not happening in a vacuum. The conversations we've all been part of over the last year about racial justice and the more recent painful news from Minneapolis that's being felt here in Pittsburgh as well, and the remarkable number of restrictive voting laws being championed across the country are all part of the context for this work. As we grapple with all of that, today we gather to discuss how, out of that pain and trauma, we can do better and make progress. For today's conversation about technical tools and policies for business, the true impact that we seek is in addressing the perpetuation of systemic inequities. And one way we can do that is to use the influence we have over the tools and tactics excuse me, that we can employ to advance equity in our workplaces. We can educate our colleagues. We can equip our organizations for culture transformation. We can elevate diverse voices and create equitable opportunities. And we can be part of the transformational change that's needed both inside and outside our organization's walls. So thank you for being here with us today to get started on this important work. I am going to take a couple of seconds here before we get started to acknowledge our partners and sponsors. So in addition to today's presenters, we want to thank the CEOs for Sustainability sponsors, UPMC Health Plan, Covestro LLC, and the Pittsburgh Pirates. It's their generous support that's helped to make this event possible. First on the agenda, we have Laura McKnight of Vibrant Pittsburgh and Gina Johnson of Sustainable Pittsburgh sharing some DE&I tools and frameworks to guide your efforts. So Laura is going to lead our expert panelists in discussion. With us today are Dina Clark, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Covestro, Jeremy Shapiro, Chief Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity Officer for Giant Eagle, Robert James, Chief Diversity Officer from Highmark Health, and Dr. David Spradley, Assistant VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Dollar Bank. A few housekeeping notes for today. We will be recording this webinar. In fact, are already recording this webinar. As we hear from today's presenters, we invite you to submit your questions using the Q&A box. The presenters will be taking your questions after their brief remarks. And with that, I will hand it over to Gina to get us started.
Thanks, Joylette. So we're looking here on screen at some data points compiled at the website of CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And even as the US population becomes more diverse in every sense, what we're seeing is that many businesses have done little to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion in their own people. This is a great opportunity for good business. We know that having leaders, employers, and suppliers who bring an understanding of and access to an increasingly diverse consumer base, these are real business assets that can translate into bottom line benefits. So where to begin? That's what we're going to talk about now. I'm going to share Sustainable Pittsburgh resources and tools for advancing DE&I. Some we're excited to be launching in coming weeks and months. All of Sustainable Pittsburgh's equity programming is compatible with and a good entree to the Vibrant Index and the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmarks Framework, which Laura will describe next. All of these tools include a focus on supplier diversity. That's a very large subject that we invite you to look for a webinar series with the Eastern Minority Supplier Development Council and other partners later this year, which will delve into that topic. So, as many of you know, Sustainable Pittsburgh's mission is to empower decision-making that builds a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. In addition to thought leadership and collective impact projects, we offer a suite of performance programs for workplaces and municipalities to advance sustainability practices, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as you can see across the top of this screen, these include designation programs for small retail shops, restaurants, and Pennsylvania municipalities. Through any of these programs, an organization can follow a framework, access resources, and take step-by-step actions in areas like DE&I, employee engagement, energy and water savings, and so on to earn a bronze, silver, gold, or platinum level of designation. For years, many of you will also have been familiar with our Sustainable Pittsburgh Challenge, a friendly competition that involved hundreds of the region's workplaces. This program is being reinvented as the Sustainable Pittsburgh Workplace designation, set to launch this fall, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. To help participants in all of these programs, we have these resources for advancing progress, toolkits, and soon to come friendly competitions we call sprints. And finally, to support the professionals involved in this work, we host 2 professional networks, CEOs for Sustainability, which is led by the region's business leaders, and the Sustainable Community Development Network for elected leaders and staff at municipalities statewide. So getting started, one tool that you can start using today is the Leading Forward Roadmap. This is a resource CEOs for Sustainability and Sustainable Pittsburgh developed last fall to support a set of priorities CEOs for Sustainability has established to support a sustainable economic recovery. Specifically, CEOs for Sustainability challenge the region's workplaces to support local businesses and communities, as you can see indicated here, to reduce carbon emissions in their workplaces, and advance racial and ethnic equity. The roadmap is designed to provide a strategic framework for business action on these goals, and you can access it for free at the URL shown here. For each of those 3 priority areas, the roadmap contains strategic steps and customizable tools. This screenshot shows initial steps in the equity section. It was created with guidance from the region's sustainability professionals, as well as university and nonprofit partners, including Vibrant Pittsburgh. Linked to the roadmap is the Leading Forward Roadmap Resources, a web page that aggregates hands-on tools and support for addressing key challenges. Now, just as the Leading Forward Roadmap includes an equity toolkit for medium and large workplaces, Sustainable Pittsburgh is introducing sector-specific equity toolkits for shops, restaurants, and municipalities. You can look for those in coming months. As mentioned, we're really excited to be launching the workplace designation and sprint competitions designed to spur progress in key focus areas. You can see an equity sprint is launching later this year. It's worth noting that the Leading Forward Roadmap, the equity toolkits, and the sprints are all based on criteria and resources drawn directly from the workplace designation. And as such, progress in one of these equals progress in the others. To give you a little more sense of the new workplace designation, and here this is with thanks to Program Manager Sarah Sangiovanni at Sustainable Pittsburgh, who's leading this effort. We expect the workplace designation and sprints to comprise a more user-friendly, materiality-based, and impactful evolution of the Sustainable Pittsburgh Challenge, in which so many of your companies participated over the years. Distinct in the workplace program is a strategic sustainability section. This is designed to walk the participant through identifying the sustainability issues most material to their organization, making a plan for addressing those issues, and integrating that plan into the organization strategy. Each of the other 9 impact-focused topics will encourage users to conduct an assessment of current performance, set goals and KPIs, take action, and then communicate results. DE&I actions can be found in 2 of these topics in particular. In the people section, DE&I is intrinsic to the recommended workplace policies and practices across all of those people actions and criteria. And in the responsible products and services section, supplier diversity is a key theme. Taking a closer look at just that people category, you can see that the criteria build upon one another to provide a pathway for progress, from articulating your vision, engaging your organization, down through more advanced topics in recruitment and hiring, down through pay equity, and so on. This allows participants at any level of sustainability progress to earn points for the actions they have taken and consider steps for continued improvement. I do hope that you'll take the next steps to get started with Sustainable Pittsburgh's DE&I resources. You can access the Leading Forward Roadmap, plan to participate in the new designation and sprints, and attend our upcoming events. To keep apprised of all these opportunities, Subscribe to our newsletter. There's the URL there, sustainablepittsburgh.org/newsletter. And now I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who's going to share some more DE&I frameworks.
Thank you so much, Gina. I'm very happy to be here and to continue this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion within our region and how it can impact the sustainability of our region. So for those of you that are not aware, Vibrant Pittsburgh is a nonprofit member organization, and we are focused on the economic development of the Pittsburgh region. And we work to attract, retain, and elevate a diversity of talent to make our region a destination of choice for the employment of people of color. And we know that workers of the future are more racially and ethnically diverse than ever before. By the year 2044, more than half of Americans will identify as members of underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. And what we know about our region is that those underrepresented racial and ethnic groups only comprise about 13% of our Pittsburgh regional population and approximately 11% of our region's workforce. And metropolitan Pittsburgh ranks as the second least diverse region in the United States top 100 metro areas. So as the demographics of our nation change, it's very crucial that our region becomes a draw for a diversity of talent and that we become a welcoming place of opportunity for all. Organizations that are acting as leaders in equity and inclusion play such a critical role in making this talent transition. So this is the time for us to act on the changes necessary for our region's shared future to become a reality. Next slide, please. So our tool, which works in concert with Sustainable Pittsburgh's tools, is the Vibrant Index, and it's a collaboration between our organization and the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. And we are looking to drive changes in DE&I across industry and sector by identifying areas of organizational success, as well as what critical actions are needed to improve the practices, policies, and cultures of the organizations that are here in the Pittsburgh region. So our Vibrant Index is encouraging, and it encourages companies to reflect on those promising practices that they're already doing while investigating some additional opportunities that they can utilize to increase the impact of their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Our goal is to move the needle on talent attraction, retention, and elevation as quickly as possible through the review, recommendation, and implementation of practices that lead to more welcoming and inclusive work environments. We feel that by nudging our region's organizations in the right direction toward more inclusive practices, we can galvanize efforts around this shared urgency. And we know that what is acknowledged can be shared and shifted quickly. So a commitment to the goals of the Vibrant Index by many organizations in our region will facilitate the changes that are necessary for the region to thrive. Next slide. So our methodology and focus is on the importance of policies and practices in building inclusive workplaces. And this was refined through a targeted review by diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, both in our region and globally, including experts from the Gdeib, or Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmarks, which we will talk about in just a few moments. Along with our Diversity Assessment Committee that is housed within Vibrant Pittsburgh, our industry experts included researchers, data analysts, HR professionals, and other DEI practitioners. Participation in this process is simple. Organizations complete a confidential diagnostic survey, and this captures the practices that they are currently utilizing as well as opportunity areas. In our first year of the index, we captured information about 2019 and what organizations were doing in that calendar year. And we had 50 organizations that participated. They were members of both Vibrant Pittsburgh and the Allegheny Conference. These 50 companies employed a total of approximately 140,000 employees in the Pittsburgh region. So their behaviors and policies impacted approximately 12% of our local population. These diagnostic criteria areas that are listed here are the category areas that we are looking at for the 2020 year of data collection. We looked at written commitments and transparency, so how organizations are making public commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are they signing diversity pledges? Are they making public their anti-discrimination policies? We looked at benefits and policies. So how are your benefits and policies written? Are they as open to a diversity of talent as they possibly could be? Are you taking care to review those policies annually and making sure that these policies, which are tangible evidence of an organization's commitment, are as welcoming as possible? We looked at employee networks. So we know that employee resource groups and employee business resource groups are not necessarily the right fit for every organization, but we do know that for organizations that do house them, that they provide that organization with critical insights into different communities and cultures. And they create better ways to create those inclusive environments by having a direct line of contact with the communities that the organization wants to include and make feel more welcomed. This is something that may be out of reach for smaller organizations, but for organizations that an ERG does make sense for, they can be a wonderful way and opportunity for an organization to begin to do work in DE&I. We looked at diversity and leadership, as we know that D&I work is most effective when an organization has the buy-in of the totality of the leadership. We looked at training and education. So what are the topics in DE&I that an organization is utilizing for professional development? How often are those training topics being utilized? Is this something that is just happening when someone is onboarded, or is it a conversation that continues? We looked at accountability metrics. So what data is being collected, talent engagement and recruitment. So how are organizations preparing their recruiters? How are they engaging with their talent? Where are they posting job positions? We, of course, looked at supplier diversity. We know that this is an area where we can see the biggest opportunity for our region and for our region's employers. Community engagement, so how are organizations interfacing and supporting the communities within the region? And then we added an additional category this year for organizational responses and how organizations were interacting with their employees and with communities in response to systemic inequities that were highlighted in 2020 and also for the pandemic. So what was the response that an organization had, and are they capturing the data themselves about what their employees needed and how they were able to address those needs and concerns? Next slide. So why capture promising practices? It's very clear, especially as we're continuing into 2021 and we are continuing to see the social unrest that is going on around our nation, that there are sentiments of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're high right now, but we must move beyond those sentiments and really bake those changes into our organizations at operational levels. Practices and policies outlive our sentiments, and that's why it is so crucial to take these tools like the ones that were described by Sustainable Pittsburgh, the ones I'm talking about now with the Vibrant Index, and then also the global diversity and inclusion benchmarks, and utilize them to make these changes more tangible within your organization. At Vibrant, we always say that what we measure is what matters to us, and that what we measure gets attention. So utilizing the Vibrant Index is a way to have a confidential measurement tool in place for your organization. And we have a summary report that comes out annually that really reviews the efforts of the group that participated in that confidential process so that we can release some aggregated data to the region and help improve overall our region's response to systemic inequity and really make that DE&I effort more concerted, making sure that we're all looking in the same direction and working with the best practices that are possible. And that's really what we're here to do, to look at what are we doing? Is it working? How do we know? Are we measuring progress? Are we making progress? So that's the basic rationale behind the Vibrant Index. Next slide. So participation, how can an organization participate? Our data period has closed for 2020. We were capturing 2020 data from mid-March to approximately the end of March of this year. We will be sending out our participant reports, which are those individual organizational reports that are confidential. They will be going out to organizations with their data, letting them know how they scored, how the totality of the group scored in terms of high scores and average scores in each criteria area, and customized recommendations. That's all going to be released in May of this year. And then we anticipate having the aggregated data together and our summary report released in July 2021 of this year, and announcing our Vibrant Champions. Next slide. So the Vibrant Champions are those organizations that have really achieved a lot for that particular calendar year diagnostic. And we highlighted 3 organizations for our first year of data collection for the Vibrant Index, which was in 2019. Those organizations were PNC, Reed Smith, and UPMC. We really do want to stress that an organizational designation of Vibrant Champion doesn't convey perfection on the part of that organization. Vibrant Pittsburgh and our partner in this process, the Allegheny Conference, we recognize that there's no one right way to practice inclusion, and that some of the practices that we are studying may be more feasible for some companies than others, or some industries than others. So a score which for the 2019 year was 95% or above. That's what designated a Vibrant Champion. Getting that score simply means that that company adheres to many of the numerous diversity, equity, and inclusion practices that are featured in our diagnostic. So again, it does not convey perfection, but it does say something about the promising practices that are being utilized by our Vibrant Champions. Next slide. So stepping out farther and looking at resources that are not necessarily tied to the Pittsburgh region, we have the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmarks. And this is a tool that was created by the Center for Global Diversity. And we have utilized the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion benchmarks with Vibrant Pittsburgh for many years, and have worked very closely with the Center for Global Inclusion. And we highly recommend, if you're looking for a tool that expands outside of our region, outside of our nation, and really looks at practices that are being recommended around the world, that you look to the Gdeib. It used to be the Global Diversity and Inclusion benchmarks. I'm quite used to saying that, but they have put the E in for equity. So this tool is a 78-page booklet, and it helps organizations determine strategy and measure progress in managing diversity and fostering inclusion. This is a free tool that can be utilized once an organization signs their user agreement. It was written by the center's founding board members, Julie O'Mara and Alan Richter, and also with Nani Molefe. And they worked with 112 expert panelists to create this tool. It has been around for years. It is highly useful and very comprehensive. It also comes with a suite of user tools that are downloadable at their website, and you can utilize them to help approach this booklet and help to begin to analyze the contents of their tools. They have tips and suggestions that really outline everything about how to present this to your leadership, how to implement these suggestions every day. So I think that this is another tool that has a lot of use and benefit for organizations regardless of their size, and I highly recommend it for organizations in our region. Please reach out either to myself or to Gina if you have any additional questions about this tool. We can help you get started and get you connected to leadership at the Center for Global Inclusion if you wanted to have a more in-depth conversation about their tool. So at this point, I am very excited to spend some time and pivot our conversation and talk with executives at some of our organizations in the region who are advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion at our region's leading companies. And I'm pleased to moderate this discussion with our impressive lineup of DE&I leaders from Covestro, Highmark Health, Giant Eagle, and Dollar Bank. Each of our panelists has been invited to provide a brief snapshot of what advancing DEI looks like at their very different businesses. And then afterward, we look forward to having a discussion with you and your questions. So we invite you to use the Q&A box if you haven't already to submit your questions, and they will be utilized for a discussion once we are done with these short presentations from our panelists about their current DE&I efforts. And to get us started, I'm going to begin with Dina Clark, who serves as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Covestro LLC at their North American headquarters here in Pittsburgh. In this role, she spearheads the development and implementation of Covestro's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy across the United States and in collaboration with Covestro's office in Mexico. This includes leading efforts to engage employees across the business, as well as establish and manage the company's diversity councils and employee resource groups. Dina is also working in partnership with the company president and executive leadership team to align Covestro's diversity and inclusion goals with the business goals, which also includes working in conjunction with the procurement department on supplier diversity. Dina also serves on Covestro's Global Diversity and Inclusion Council, as well as the Global Core Team, currently based at Covestro's global headquarters in Leverkusen, Germany. Dina is very involved in the Pittsburgh community. She's a graduate of Leadership Pittsburgh, currently serves on several boards and advisory committees. She does professional housing discrimination testing for the Fair Housing Partnership of Pittsburgh, does diversity and anti-bias trainer work for the Anti-Defamation League. She does a lot in the Pittsburgh region. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and child family studies from Syracuse University, a master's degree from Duquesne University, and she is working on her doctorate in education at Point Park University. I don't know how she does all of it. So, Dina, given all of that and everything that's going on and everything that I know about all of the good work that is going on at Covestro, what efforts have your current focus right now?
First and foremost, thank you. I'm tired listening. I appreciate it. Laura, I need a vacation. That's where we're going to start. No, but in all seriousness, thank you for having me. This is certainly a focus area that I have passion for, personally and professionally. And the focus right now has been keeping the ball in the air. There have been so many things that were happening even prior to what I'll say is this past year and a half. Including not just the pandemic, the racial reckoning, the escalation of violence and hate, the intersection of not only the awareness of sustainability efforts linked to DE&I, but how companies interpret that. So there's been just a whole lot. I am pleased to say that we've been working on these things earlier. It doesn't mean we're anywhere close to finished, but this wasn't a starting conversation. So we were able to sort of ramp up our efforts. And I'll give you some highlight of what that looks like. So at Covestro, if people aren't familiar with Covestro, we are headquartered in Germany, but we were regionally headquartered right in Pittsburgh. And We are a chemical manufacturing organization that looks at high performance materials. We have several business units, and there's a lot of different efforts. I believe our materials in something like 14,000 different end products. So there's a lot that we have our sort of scope around. But early on, a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion was communicated by the company, and it's been extended through not only the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are an active part of our engagement, but through the strengthening of our diversity councils, our employee resource groups. All of our leadership team members have anchored their individual goals for their business unit areas, and I'm really pleased to say that they've extended our efforts that started in the United States to our global groups, and we're going to be launching our first global DE&I report, I believe, later this month. So there's just a lot going on. I think one of the biggest challenges when I say keep the ball in the air is politics. Before, sort of, there was a line between political space and topics that were, you know, as easy as football were able to be talked about at work. And now something like wearing a mask or having a conversation about a football game can quickly become political. So establishing parameters on what that looks like from a policy and procedure standpoint, understanding what laws are in place. I'm right now, you know, looking very carefully at the Senate bill 1646 in Texas that was just introduced. I don't know if it looks at potentially criminalizing transition care for transgender children. And we have one of our largest facilities in Texas. So these are things that I try and pay attention to see where they evolve. Same thing with what's going on in Georgia. So the idea is not necessarily to pull the company into any political discussions, but really define where the lines are and the responsibility we have to our employees. I'm happy to say that, very similar to what the benchmarks outlined, which I also appreciated you sharing those documents, we do have a focus for recruitment, retention, and development of our employees, making sure that we're paying careful attention to our culture and the voices of our employees in our culture, making sure that our community commitments, including what we're seeing in the sustainability space, are also aligned with what we're doing, and that we can measure. I think metrics is one of the hardest pieces because you've got compliance related data, you've got culture data, you've got community data, all looking to demonstrate impact. And you have to have a system to put all of that in. So that's one of the bigger challenges that we're working on right now. But the leaders are connected, they're supportive. It's nice to be able to see some of the progress. I think we have a lot, like I said, we have a long way to go, but it's a nice opportunity to see some of those things being addressed. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's certainly where we are right now.
It did, and I think that that's key to know right now, is that regardless of if you're at the beginning of your journey or you know, you've been doing this for years, that this is new territory right now, I think, for many organizations. So thank you for sharing that window into where you're at. I'd like to also introduce Robert James, or Bob James. He is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Highmark Health. And it is a blended health organization that includes one of America's largest Blue Cross Blue Shield insurers and a growing regional hospital and physician network. He is responsible for implementing and advising upon Highmark Health's enterprise-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Mr. James joined Highmark in 2015 as the Supplier Diversity Program Director and steadily grew the program to become one of the top award-winning supplier diversity programs in the Americas, as recognized by industry peers throughout the Procurement Leaders America Supplier Diversity and Inclusion Award. He was also named a top 30 Champions of Diversity by Diversity Plus magazine. Prior to joining Highmark Health, Mr. James served as CEO of a diversity and inclusion consulting firm and in an advisory role with the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. A practicing lawyer for more than 20 years, he spent several years facilitating historically Black colleges and universities, financing nationally for capital projects through a U.S. Department of Education program. Mr. James was named a top 30 champions of diversity by Diversity Plus magazine in 2018. He is currently an active member of Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf's Advisory Council for Diversity, Inclusion, and Small Business Opportunities, and serves as a member of its executive committee. Mr. James has a Master of Business and a Master of Health Administration from the University of Pittsburgh, a Juris Doctor from Georgetown University Law Center, and a Bachelor of Arts from Boston College. He is also a graduate of the inaugural class of Carnegie Mellon University's Tepper School of Business, the Advanced Leadership Institute Executive Leadership Academy. Bob, welcome. Very excited to have you here. So, given everything that's going on again this year, the last 18 months, I would say, can you tell me more about what's been high priority for Highmark? What's been a high priority for diversity, equity, and inclusion with so many things shifting and changing right now?
Absolutely. And I want to start off by, I have to thank Vibrant Pittsburgh for putting on this wonderful event where you're educating and providing awareness to the communities that we serve. I think that it's something that is needed, and appreciate the role that you, Vibrant Pittsburgh, play in that. I have a personal story I have to share. 6 years ago, I boomeranged back to Pittsburgh from the Northern Virginia area. And I have to say that really the thing that enabled me to stay and for my wife to kind of make that initial connection was a Vibrant Pittsburgh event at the mansion on Fifth Avenue. And so I have to say that I'm committed to paying it forward. I understand the role that Vibrant Pittsburgh plays in so many different things, and hope to continue post-COVID hosting events personally for Vibrant Pittsburgh, where people have actually found opportunities. When people get together, when decision makers get together with Vibrant Pittsburgh constituents, that's what happens. They find opportunities. So just want to give you that background, but want to give you a sense and trace just a little bit of our journey for understanding. And at Highmark Health, many of you know about us, but some may not. We're about 35,000 employees. We're one of the largest Blue Cross Blue Shields in the country. We're an $18 billion company, and we're a healthcare company. We're committed to ensuring that our patients and our members have a remarkable healthcare experience. And so we've been doing diversity and inclusion for decades. I remember back in the 80s, we had board members, many of you may be familiar with, Art Edmonds of the Urban League, Milt Washington of ARCO, and Gary Trueheart back in the early 80s. And we still have, as chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee, our longest serving board member, who's Doris Carson Williams. So we've been focused on diversity and inclusion for years. We've been fortunate to receive recognitions for our efforts and our initiatives in different areas: LGBT, veterans, people with disabilities, and those are achievements that we've been, very, very proud of. And last year, we were proud to win that award, as you mentioned, in supplier diversity, which was also that was a big award, and something that we had worked really, really hard, our procurement team, to ensure that we had diverse spend and innovation in our supplier diversity initiatives. In addition, we've championed women for years, and I think it shows when you look at our executive leaders who are women. It's 50% of our leaders. When you look across our workforce, 73% of our workforce are women, and so we really take pride in some of those achievements and recognize that we still have work to do. But even looking at all those recognitions and achievements, we, a couple years ago, after the University of Pittsburgh research study on gender and ethnic inequality, we recognized that employers in this region needed to do more. And we looked at that data that was really heart-wrenching, and we really set forth to ask ourselves, what can we do as a healthcare company? And we established what we call health care working group, known as the Health Equity Campaign. And that was comprised of executives enterprise-wide at our company. And we were really focused on healthcare disparities and several other areas, including procurement and our people, based on the study and what we were finding in terms of the data. But it wasn't long before, as we know, 2020 came along, which really, I think, transformed all of our lives and all of our companies. And that was a moment where first we were faced with COVID, then we were faced with the financial crisis, and then the killing of George Floyd, which resonated not only here in Pittsburgh, across the nation, but across the world. And we saw it in the wide-ranging protests that I don't think any of us have ever seen before, of people of all different races, ages, backgrounds. And it was a cry for equity that could not be ignored by anyone. And what we did was we looked at the new data after COVID and the financial crisis, and after the killing of George Floyd. And we found the data, of course, had worsened from where it was. And that's where we set forth to really refresh our diversity and inclusion strategy. And so we set forth 5 pillars that we really wanted to develop, I'll call it a strategic focus on. And so the first pillar, being that we're a health equity company, or a healthcare company, was health equity, reducing health disparities. This is, if you ever hear our CEO, David Holmberg, talk, he'll always say that we are a healthcare company. This is something that we have the tools, the resources, and the resolve to do something about. And so that's our first pillar. And really the first step that we took was to hire Dr. Margaret Larkins Pettigrew, who many of you may have heard of. She's our new Chief Diversity Clinical Officer at Allegheny Health Network. I'm proud to have her as my diversity colleague within our enterprise, and she's already beginning to do work in the area of reducing health disparities. We're looking at infant mortality, and then of course we also noted that chronic disease. We saw that in how COVID played out. Who did it attack? It attacked those with chronic diseases, and we had a lot of people of color who had chronic diseases. And so those are areas that we are focused on trying to do better in. A second pillar that we had set forth is philanthropy. And so we really want to align our philanthropic, our corporate giving with our DEI. And so one of the first things I know that Dina on our panel will appreciate as a graduate of the Advanced Leadership Initiative and Carnegie Mellon is that we gave them $1.5 million to really ensure that Pittsburgh and the region of Pittsburgh has a pipeline of African-American executives ready to ascend to the senior levels of companies. And so that was the first of what are many philanthropic efforts and initiatives related to DEI. And then we, of course, have our people. So we actually set forth, metrics are something that have to be utilized if we're going to really move the needle in terms of DEI. And so we have pledged, committed to double the number of people of color within our enterprise workforce. So we have an enterprise workforce of 35,000. We've pledged to double the number of people of color in our enterprise. So we're very serious. We measure. We look at ways that we can get that done, but it's something that over a 5-year period we've committed to do. In addition, we have our pipeline. And so when you think of our pipeline, we just launched, some of you may be aware, if not, you'll be hearing about it soon, Straight to Business, which is something for disadvantaged seniors who are going on to college. They will be able to work for Highmark, and while they're working for Highmark, they'll be able to go tuition free to college with every intent. And you'll find with equity, DEI, you've got to be intentional. You got to be focused on your efforts. And so with every intent that they will join us as a part of our people, as a part of our talent and workforce. So, and then the last and 5th pillar is our purchasing. So that's our supplier diversity initiatives. And so we've pledged to triple our diverse spend with minority owned businesses. And we've also pledged to triple our number of proteges in our mentor protege program. And so by tripling that number, that diverse spend number, that's really about $425 million that we'll be putting back into the pockets of minority-owned business owners. And so, those are some of the things that we're doing, and that's, I'll call it at a very high level. But I can tell you that I'm involved in regular meetings. As a matter of fact, I just got out of a meeting with all of our people leaders related to our refreshed DE&I strategy. Every employee will be touched by our DEI strategy, will be aware of our DEI strategy. I've already talked to all of our employees, talked to our people leaders, talked to of course, our executive leadership team, and it will just continue over time, so that really, I think the way DEI has to be done, if it's going to be done right, is it has to be a part of our DNA. And so that's really where we are. DEI is a part of our DNA. It's something that we're committed to, and we want to see the best results in terms of those 5 pillars so that we can. So pleased to share with you additional thoughts during the panel. Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
I love it. I love it. And I'm going to take away what you said: tools, resources, and resolve. I think that those are 3 that are key. And I love these big goals. Say we're going to triple it and we're going to do it. It's so important to really, put a stake in the ground.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're responding to the times. We were already proactive. We were ahead even of the George Floyd and thinking about, okay, how can we, after the University of Pittsburgh study, how can we help? But after post George Floyd and the time that we're in now, we recognize, I think, more than ever that there's more that we can do to help. Yeah. And pleased to be with a company that is committed to doing so.
I love it. And I want to say that, it's such a great segue into introducing Jeremy Shapiro of Giant Eagle. He's leading inclusion, equity, and diversity at Giant Eagle and is currently focused on the company's commitment to stand up against racism. He grew up in Pittsburgh and went to college in Philadelphia. And after a 10-year stint in New York City, he moved back to Pittsburgh to be with his family and to work at Giant Eagle. He has had various responsibilities since then, including leading the HR strategy for the company's market district and Get-Go brands, as well as leading talent acquisition and customer service. Additionally, Jeremy is very proud of Giant Eagle's 40-year history of employing people with disabilities and is thankful to have the opportunity to participate in such meaningful work. Jeremy serves on the boards of Achieva and the Squirrel Hill Health Center, a federally qualified health center focused on the immigrant and refugee populations here in the region. Jeremy also leads Giant Eagle's United Way campaign, raising over $1.5 million every year for the communities served by the company. Jeremy, Bob was talking about big, audacious goals, and I know that Giant Eagle has made some big goals very public. Can you tell me more about the focus that Giant Eagle has right now?
Yes, first of all, I have to say thank you for the opportunity to talk with everyone today. I also have to say I feel totally insufficient after Dina and Bob talked. They're obviously incredibly impressive. I know Paul is extremely impressive too, and it really is an honor to be with each of you. I feel like a little bit I'm here to represent companies that are at the beginning of their journey. As you mentioned at the beginning of the call, Laura, if you had asked me on May 24th of last year if I thought that Giant Eagle was doing an okay job with inclusion, equity, and diversity, I would have said yes. I think that I personally was doing an okay job. I think the company was making good inroads. We had a nice strategy, and things were moving along nicely. And then George Floyd was murdered. And it took us, admittedly, about a week. When I say us, I'm really talking about me and my sister Laura, the CEO. We didn't know exactly what was happening, and we didn't know exactly what to go do about it. But it was about 6 days later, the next Sunday morning, where we both woke up and sort of spontaneously called each other and said, we have got to get on top of this. And I'm the first one to say that I don't think we knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into. But we committed to putting out our first communication, just like many companies were doing at the time. I drafted the first letter. Laura reviewed it, of course, made a bunch of changes. About 1,000 people looked at it to make sure that it was right. And the next morning we published it. And what we found was that it unleashed this incredible power in the organization. And all of a sudden we realized, aha, we're not the only people thinking about this. Of course, that was evident. But it set us down a path of committing to make positive change both inside and outside the company. So over the next 6 weeks or so, we developed what we refer to as our standing up against racism strategy. That is based on 5 key commitments. And as we were writing the commitments, we were determined to be as specific and as ambitious as possible. And so as we were looking at what other companies were doing, we decided our role was to put ourselves out there. Now, Giant Eagle is a private family held company, and admittedly, it is much easier for us to get the support of the board as well as the executive leadership team. And so a lot of those kinds of roadblocks were cleared, and it made it actually very easy for us to arrive at what we have stated publicly as our commitments. The first commitment is to reach 14% Black representation at leadership levels across the company by 2025. And obviously that is opening up all sorts of questions, all sorts of challenges. Obviously we wouldn't have set the goal at 14% if we were there today. So there is a lot of work ahead of us in that. I think of that goal in terms of 4 key pillars. The first is recruiting. Obviously, we have to figure out how to recruit more Black talent from outside the organization. The second is how do we identify the Black talent that we have today and help get them on the development path so that they can reach leadership levels. Third, and perhaps more importantly, is how do we remove and prevent as much bias in the process as possible? So it doesn't help to recruit and develop if there continue to be roadblocks in the process. And then the fourth, what we're learning is that none of that matters unless when Black leaders get to the leadership levels that they don't feel included and a sense of belonging. It doesn't help to get them there and then have them leave the organization. And so we are currently working through all of the challenges related to that. Again, I'm the first person to say we don't have all the answers, but just having set the goal is what's important. The second thing is that we committed to placing a Black business executive on our board, which I'm happy to say we accomplished late last year. Third, we committed to doing a compensation equity study by race, which is in process. And then of course, if we find any inequities, of course, close those gaps. And then additionally, how do you put the right guardrails in place so that inequities never happen in the future? Fourth, we committed to doubling the number of Black-owned suppliers that we have each year for the next 5 years. So exponential growth now it's over the next 4 years. And I'm happy to report that we, although it took some time to actually identify how many Black-owned vendors we have today, because there aren't any, or at least to my knowledge, any certifications that are specific to Black-owned suppliers. We had to spend some time just identifying our baseline. I'm happy to report that we've met our first year goal. And then last, and in some ways, this is the one that I think over long periods of time can be the most powerful. We've committed to helping solve food insecurity and food access challenges in communities that have Black majority populations. So the goal in the first year was to assist 3 communities somewhere in our market areas. It just so happens that the first 3 communities are in the Pittsburgh area. Again, we don't have that all figured out, but just having set the goal is forcing us to start to work through all of the various challenges. And I think Giant Eagle has a significant role to play in helping solve these kinds of issues. I'll say moving forward, one of the big challenges is going to be, we came out of the gate very strong, specific to racism as it relates to the Black community. But as we've seen over the past several months, the Black community is not the only community that suffers from racism. And I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with what is happening to the Asian American community. And the challenge for us moving forward is, how do you create a world where people all feel like we are part of the same quilt? While and making us feel like we're really all part of the same family, while making sure that each community feels like they're getting the respect and the attention that they deserve, without making it feel like communities are competing against one another. And so, admittedly, this is a new challenge for us. I feel like the ground continually shifts under our feet. I'm sure that many people on this call and out there in the world are feeling very similarly. And it just, frankly, is a matter of us staying on our toes, keeping our heads up, and continuing to ask the challenging questions. So I'm really eager to talk more about this. Hopefully some of the things that we've learned over the past year can be helpful to people who are participating in the call today, and I look forward to questions. So thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And I really appreciate the transparency around where Giant Eagle is at and how quickly an organization can make decisions to pivot and to reinvest in something like DE&I. I appreciate that. And we're going to talk more about that with Paul David Spradley, Dr. Paul David Spradley, who has nearly 15 years of experience routinely advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts toward positive organizational and individual results. Dr. Paul David Spradley is regarded as an expert, thought leader, and social engineer in his field. He currently serves as the Assistant Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Dollar Bank, where he supports their ongoing commitment to an inclusive culture across the Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia markets. Hailing from Pittsburgh, Spradley is a proud graduate of the Pittsburgh Public School System. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and a Master of Science in Instructional Leadership from Robert Morris University. And in 2017, he received his doctorate in education from the University of Pittsburgh, where his research explored transformational practices of care by mentors who served Black adolescent males. Paul, we're really happy to have you here on the panel, and I would love to hear from you more about what it's like to start a diversity, equity, and inclusion program from the ground up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction. And I don't know if the folks in the audience realize this, but this is a stacked panel. Like, the folks that are here are rock stars in this work around diversity, equity, inclusion. So I'm grateful to be a part of it. I'd actually like to start my talk by just asking you to take a quick moment of silence to remember those who most recently killed by police. Black man, Dante Wright, was shot and killed by police 11 miles from where George Floyd was murdered, 13 miles from where Philando Castile was murdered. He was allegedly pulled over for having an air freshener in his window. There's a lot of folks that are protesting right now. So I'd just like to take 5 seconds and just honor and remember those people. Thank you. So many of us in Pittsburgh, we come to all of the lectures, we sit on the DEI committees, but when it's time to vote or speak against police brutality or racism or sexism or hate against Asian Americans, it becomes someone else's issue, it seems like, in Pittsburgh. So I'm asking everyone that's on this call to commit to becoming a disruptor. And when whether your organization is on board or not, make that commitment for yourself. That being said, I'm actually curious about where our participants are when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. Where are they at in the process? So in a second, a short poll is going to pop up on your screen. It is anonymous, so you don't have to worry about being called out specifically, but please answer to the best of your ability. I just want to do a quick pulse check and see where the audience is at. So if you could take a second and so the question is, where is your organization with reference to incorporating DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, into the organization? The organization has not acknowledged the need, but myself and a few others are generating interest is the first response. The second is the organization has acknowledged DEI as a need, but is unsure where to start. Third, the organization has acknowledged DEI as a need and has begun the journey, so kind of on the beginning stages. And then last is the organization has a strong why for incorporating DEI into its overall strategy and is well on its way into the journey. So if your organization feels like Avestro or Giant Eagle or Highmark, you would click that last button there. We'll give it just a few more seconds for folks to respond. I can't respond. It literally says host and panelists can't vote. They must have pulled their processes from Georgia. So I don't know how the results will share on the screen. If we're even able to see those. There we go. So it looks like about 59% of folks say that their organization has acknowledged diversity, equity, inclusion, and has begun the journey. So that's fantastic. That is, and it's spread out, I think, fairly evenly. We see a lot of this. So the folks that are on the call today have started the process overwhelmingly for the most part. And so I think that's pretty cool. So in my last few minutes, what I want to share is a blueprint towards becoming a disruptor. This process, these steps will guide my next few minutes. And I say it's one example of a blueprint because someone had asked a question in the chat earlier, or actually in the Q&A, what are some steps for folks who are looking to get started? So one blueprint to be a DEI change agent is, and I'm going to throw out some words and then I'm going to repeat them over the course of my last few minutes, but assess, commit, strategize, disrupt, reflect, and then repeat. So assess, collect data, learn, commit. There needs to be a commitment. We've actually heard about that commitment from everyone today at the highest level. Strategize, coming up with a plan, or having a person or a team coming up with a plan. Disrupt, which is important, but it's not a single event, right? This idea of disruption is not a single event. Reflect, so ask questions, measure, what are the metrics saying? And then repeat the process. It's important to repeat this strategy because again, it's not a one and done. This is ongoing. So for Dollar Bank, I want to talk about our process using these elements of this blueprint of being a DEI change agent. 7 months before the death of George Floyd, our Vice President of Human Resources, Stephanie Herring, began championing this role, my role, to senior leadership and to the board. Going as far as drafting a job description. She collected data on her own, and then as part of Tally, Bob James had mentioned Tally earlier, but Tally is the Advanced Leadership Initiative that's hosted at Carnegie Mellon and founded by Evan Frazier. So she was getting information from Tally on how to build this out. She personally committed, and then others were inspired by her commitment. There was a strategy put in place, and then she disrupted what was by hiring me, essentially, so which freed her up to continue to operate at a very high level in human resources. And I mentioned Tally because this organization is literally training high-level change agents, right? 2 of the graduates are from the first cohort, are right here in the panel. Tally is in the business of activating people who are not afraid to disrupt, and their voices need to continue to be elevated in the professional spaces where they're at. Stephanie Herring at Dollar Bank was not afraid to disrupt, which is a crucial part of being a DEI change agent in your personal life or in your organization. And I also want to go back into our beginning, our foundation, to talk about the history of Dollar Bank. Dollar Bank, we are one of the largest mutual banks in the United States of America. We have space in Pittsburgh. Our region covers Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Ohio, Canton, Ohio, and Hampton Roads, Virginia. And our founder back in 1855 followed a similar framework that I just laid out when he made the unpopular decision to welcome women, immigrants, and Black Americans to bank with us for only $1. So to give you some context, it's 1855. Women could not vote for another almost half century. Like 1920 was when women were given the right to vote in this patriarchal established society. So women couldn't vote. They certainly couldn't open a bank account unless they wrote down the name of their husband. So they would write down Mrs. Paul Spradley, for instance. Their name and their value was literally erased when trying to open a bank account. That was what was happening at that time. Immigrants, many of whom in 1855 were Irish and Italian and Jewish immigrants, were treated horribly, right? Like very violently. And it's 1855, so slavery is still happening, right? Like this is years before the Emancipation Proclamation. And in spite of what society is doing, Charles Colton worked a similar blueprint of being a DEI change agent. He assessed and saw a gap in who had financial independence: poor people, people of color, women. He made a commitment that Dollar Bank would invest in communities of historically marginalized groups. And that commitment is still, like, we still are living that out today, and still serving as leaders in many instances. There's a strategy, right? So the strategy was making banking affordable. It was $1 a day. At other banks, you needed to have $50. Most folks at the time were only making 90 cents a day. So to save up to have $50 just to open a banking account was tough. So he made banking affordable. That was the strategy. And then the decision, it disrupted many folks who did not want to see this population experience financial equity. That decision paved the way for wealth accumulation for Black and brown people in Pittsburgh, for immigrants, for women, and for others who we're still fighting for today. So the process, this blueprint of being a DEI change agent, it works. Assess, commit, strategize, disrupt, reflect, and then repeat. And it worked for Dollar Bank's founder, Charles Colton. It's worked for Stephanie Herring in generating interest around this position at the bank even prior to the death of George Floyd. And it's currently part of the way that I'm leading our diversity, equity, inclusion work here at Dollar Bank. And so I want to end my time by just speaking about some of the things that we're doing in that same space. So with assessment, some of the best advice that I got was literally from Dina Clark. I want to thank you for that. She said, when you start this role, you need to listen and just observe. And that's what I did. Like for several months, a lot of folks didn't even know where my office was, that I was, because I was just kind of behind the scenes, asking questions, listening, observing. I spoke to our leadership about what challenges were there, what were present. And then, in those one-on-one meetings, was able to call out things that either may have been uncomfortable to call out on their own, or just genuinely didn't know were issues around diversity, equity, inclusion. I spoke with members of the bank, folks in our banks and our branches, people behind the scenes, spoke with people in the community just to assess where we were at. And then commit, this idea of commitment, right? Like the only reason I took the job was because there was such a strong commitment from the CEO, Jim McQuaid, in the interview process to lean into this work, and subsequent support from Stephanie Herring was just incredibly strong. I was actually quite comfortable. I think it was mentioned in my bio that I had started a diversity inclusion training firm. My wife is currently still running that, but we were good. There was not a need to look for other space, but the commitment here was different than what I was seeing in other spaces. And so since starting, our senior leaders have all signed a pledge committing to be engaged and open with this process. There's strategy. So I developed a strategy, and the first part of that strategy was to educate every employee of the bank by the end of this year. We're establishing base level goals for our senior level leaders, base level diversity, equity, inclusion goals in each area of the bank. And we want to improve our diverse hiring as well. The disruption happens in a bunch of different ways. And I think the folks in this panel, one of the things that we do well is sometimes we have to have tactful conversation, correcting language that a person might be using, or challenging the hiring process, or providing new ways to think about a problem. But we're doing that, we're disrupting. And then the reflective piece for me, I'm constantly reflecting, asking advice of peers and colleagues and mentors, and keeping an eye on the metrics, and then repeating this, right? Because it's not about one event to eradicate oppressive behavior. So why are we all being so transparent in our process? And I think for me, honestly, I'm tired, right? Like there's thousands of good people who care about equity and inclusion in Pittsburgh, but they don't care enough to disrupt wage discrimination, or disrupt the lack of diverse hiring, or exclusive workplaces, or there's zero or minimal representation when important decisions are being made. And I don't need everybody on this call to leave and be inspired to disrupt inappropriate practices in the workplace. We don't need everybody to do that. In fact, that's not the expectation, but there is an expectation that what we need is a critical mass, right? So don't miss that term. A critical mass was pulled from nuclear physics. Critical mass is the smallest amount of material needed for a nuclear reaction, right? Like for a nuclear reaction. And so we need the smallest amount. We need folks that are going to be change agents. And I fully expect some folks to do nothing with today's conversation, but I believe in my heart that there are a few folks who are going to be a part of this inclusion and equity nuclear reaction that Pittsburgh needs to disrupt what's been happening in our corporate and nonprofit spaces for far too long. So I'll leave you with a challenge. What group will you be a part of, right? Your words are appreciated. Going to the meetings are appreciated. Being on the panels are appreciated. Your actions, though, your actions are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spradley. And I think that is ultimately how I want to begin this discussion, is around spheres of influence. It is so easy to say that, that's someone else's job to do, or, that's HR, or that's our chief diversity officer, that they should be focused in on this. And we have questions right now in our Q&A about how to translate this work into far smaller spaces. So when you have a smaller organization or a smaller group that cares, how can you begin this process of disruption? How do you begin when you have a small but mighty organization? I would love anyone's thoughts on this.
I'll chime in. I think it's about the people and the work, not the size of the organization. So and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, all of the areas under that umbrella, you have to decide where your anchor will be and then start the work in that space. You still will need support, you still will need resources, you still will need time, but you're just doing with a smaller group. And I would actually argue that smaller is mighty because you can get more done. The bureaucracies are different, the size and scope is different. So I want people to take a firm stance on small and not an apologetic stance, because work can have more depth in a faster way. So the issues are the same because you're still dealing with people.
And I think this is where knowing the tools that are available is so incredibly important. So knowing that we have things like the goals that are outlined by the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmarks, that's a lot. But you can take that down a level and bring it regionally and say, okay, what tools are here in our region, and how does that translate for my organization? So I may not be able to hit every single opportunity in the Vibrant Index, but perhaps I can hit half of them this year. And what are the ones, how can I craft a plan that will hit more next year and more next year? It's not getting discouraged, in my opinion. I would love to know too, we have some questions around how do you know if the data is actually pointing to belonging or to diversity, equity, or inclusion? You're collecting data, but how do you know that it's working? And the second part of the question is, how do you use that data to develop or change your interventions based on the results that you're getting? So how are you shifting and pivoting in the middle of your effort?
I'm glad to take this one. I have a lot to. Let me first say that I loved all the comments of the panelists. You know, Jeremy and at the beginning of his journey, and Paul at the beginning of his journey. I mean, this is the way that it's going to really cause our region to be far more vibrant and a place where diverse talent would want to come and or to stay. You know, and so just really, I mean, these are some rock stars and have just gotten started. I mean, just absolutely amazing. So first and foremost, I can tell you that at Highmark Health, the amount of data that I now have access to is absolutely extraordinary. And I can see just every angle so that we can really ensure that we're meeting our goals, and we can see where there are opportunities. I think that's important. So, the tracking of metrics, I think, is especially as you grow as a company and you have the ability to have that technology, I think it's something that really will drive the intentionality that you have, so that you can see, well, where are you as it relates to diverse hirings, or where are you in terms of your retention and attrition, so that you can really begin to apply different interventions as needed in order to ensure that you are having a diverse workforce. But I think you really have to start at the very beginning as to why is it that a company would want to have a diverse workforce. And the best analogy I can give you, I'll give you three. And we're in the Steeler country, right? So you ask yourself, how did the Steelers get to be the phenomenal brand that they are? And so I look back to things like the Immaculate Reception. And that was, for those of you who aren't from the area, Franco Harris, running back, intercepted a pass and was able to run for the touchdown using a lot of his athleticism that he had. And so you ask yourself, what if Franco had not been on the field because we hadn't looked, we hadn't seen him. He was invisible in terms of talent. Or even worse, it was intentional that we weren't going to hire someone who was Black to play football. And you look at a Roberto Clemente and what he did for the Pirates brand and to elevate the game of baseball. And my personal favorite is Willie Mays, who married my cousin, who's a Hall of Fame baseball player. And you think of how he elevated the game, attracted fans to the game, which means more revenue to the game. And so from a healthcare perspective, I ask myself, we don't want to leave talent on the table that could ensure that we are fulfilling our mission to ensure that patients and our members have a remarkable healthcare experience. We cannot do that. We have to look far and wide for the best talent. And that means that we have to be reaching these diverse communities. And so I'm happy we have work from anywhere now, where now we can find the best talent anywhere in the country. But that still means that we have to be connected to diverse communities throughout the country. And they have to know that we care. And they have to know that we are a welcoming environment for them to work, that there's a sense of belonging that they would have if they work. And that's where our business resource groups have to be working to ensure that when somebody comes, when we attract that talent, that we have initiatives and programming that are dynamic enough where they will want to stay. And so that's why we partner with Vibrant Pittsburgh to ensure that if someone comes to Pittsburgh, and I know we just had a SVP who came to Pittsburgh, one of the first things we did, introduce them to Vibrant Pittsburgh. That's an integral part of this, ensuring that we keep people in the city. So I say all that in that it's a dynamic system that has to be in place where we can keep people. And so we had Reverend Cornell William Brooks, former NAACP head, speak to us in February, Black History Month, about equity and steps that we can take as a company and other companies to move forward. And we have an Asian, our East BRG. We'll talk about violence against Asian Americans on April 27th. And so we have to continually be having courageous conversations, and we have to tie those courageous conversations to our hiring, to our retention, to supplier diversity, to our philanthropy, to our pipeline programs, to ensure that we do have a sense of belonging and inclusive environment for employees. So the data is part of it, an important part, but I'd say it's more advanced in some of the more basic things as well.
Can I just take something very quickly about data?
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that, and this is where I think not just at Covestro, but several global companies struggle sometimes. You have the push-pull factor of how to define the data you are going to collect with common terms. So demographic data that's collected in the United States is not the same that's collected in Germany or in France or in Mexico or in China. So that's one thing. I hear in my brain, I've compartmentalized, I think in C's now since I'm at Covestro, but there are 4 sort of buckets that I put the data in: compliance, culture, community, and the 4th category I call creative. So the compliance is all the policy requirement things like federal government, EEO, affirmative action, those types of things, usually done as part of what we were already collecting. Culture can do those cultural surveys, you know, ERG data, those types of things, diversity council efforts, engagement surveys, things like that. Community impact, partnerships, leveraging professional and underrepresented partnerships with groups like the African American Chamber or the Scientists of Asian Engineers and Scientists. And then how you pull all that together to tell your story. So data is only as good as not only the system you're using, the buckets you're acknowledging, and then how you really share what that looks like, in addition to any industry commitments that are coming from the outside that are requiring you to be part of an aggregate. So those are the things that I think companies need to sort out and then figure out what's relevant to them, what's relevant to the populations they serve, and how they're going to tell their story. So thanks. I just wanted to say that.
No, I love it. I think data is the story, right? It's what backs up the story, specifically, to my mind, to get that organizational leadership from the top all the way down. If we know that it's working, if we can see that it's working, then we know that we can move forward. And so I wanted to tie this in here. Jeremy, you talked a lot about these big goals and being able to move on them quickly. And we had a question that came in through our chat that was about some specifics around, okay, so you diversified your suppliers, but how exactly did you do that? Talk to me a bit about the commitment it takes to really get down to the nitty gritty and to find the details that you need to get, because it requires a lot to make that big goal and then to follow through on it.
Well, specific to our supplier goal in terms of doubling our Black-owned vendors each year for 5 years, as I mentioned earlier, we did need to identify what our baseline was. We hired an organization called Supplier Gateway to literally scrub through our entire list of vendors, which is of course thousands and thousands of vendors. They came up with a list of a certain number that could be Black-owned, and then we literally called each one of those to confirm, which is what got us to our baseline. We are now off, and then moving forward, once we established our baseline, we now ask every single new vendor to identify as Black-owned or not. Of course, there are other categories that we ask for as well. We are now off partnering with as many different organizations to identify potential vendors that we can find. So we have lots of friends in the retail industry who are further down the path than we are. And so they have whole lists developed that we can pull from. Not every single one of those vendors is going to be right for us, but it's a great place to start.
And I love that resolve. That's exactly it. And then we called each and every one to verify that. That's the level of commitment that we need to see. And Bob talked about tools and resources and resolve. So my next question, I'm curious, I'd love to hear from anyone here. You know, if you have the tools, which we've been talking about, the tools and the tactics, and you have the resolve, you're going to disrupt, how do you get that C-suite buy-in? How do you get that upper level organizational buy-in so that you have the resources to move it forward?
You know, I just want to say a couple things. You know, on the data side, you also want to have it in the sunshine. Put it in the sunshine, meaning reporting it out to the board, you know, ensuring that the board is aware of the data. The C-level, the executives are aware of the data. And, you know, it often can show disparities. So as I mentioned, when we saw the University of Pittsburgh data, that compelled us to move forward with a health equity campaign to really begin formation of those 5 pillars. And then later we looked at more data, and that compelled us to move with regard to our refreshed diversity and inclusion strategy. So it is helpful to have visibility to data. Sometimes it's internal, and in other cases, external. Sitting on the Governor's Advisory Council, we had a disparity study. Pennsylvania had a disparity study, and that's what changed their contracting policies based on the disparities that they saw with diverse versus non-diverse vendors and their availability. So data can be a game changer, whether it be internal or whether it be external. And there are different ways you can use it. So with regard to how do you get C-suites to move, I think that C-suites tend to respond to data, probably more than anything else. And so I think it's important. We are in a time where data combined with, as we know, it's a sensitive time with where people's hearts are also attached to the equity that is compelling at this time. And so the combination is really a great combination. Yeah.
And if I can add on to that, I think the data and then creating a business case around it, because not everybody will. Again, I think Pittsburgh is a very nice place, but sometimes people like to stay in that nice space. If you talk about the dollars and cents of it, right? Like, look who's leaving Pittsburgh. Look how many folks are retiring from our workforce. And look at the the point that you, Laura, had talked about, the changing of demographics. So if we're not considering those things, there's going to be a financial impact on our output, our input, like changing demographics, meaning like folks, there's buying power. So there's people that have our Hispanic community. It might not be thriving here in Pittsburgh like it is in other spaces, but $1.7 trillion was spent by the Hispanic community in 2018. And so are we losing out on that from a financial perspective? And sometimes nudging folks that might not get diversity, equity, inclusion as it's the right thing to do right off the bat. You have to Bob's point, use data and talk about, well, what does this mean for us? What does this look like for our longevity as far as being a vibrant organization?
I agree, Paul. And I think that I get tired of hearing people say it's a program or a project or initiative. It is a business imperative that has true business results that not only tie to data, but also tie to the change behavior you're hoping to see within an organization. And from a financial standpoint, I mean, I'm sure Vibrant Pittsburgh will appreciate the push now for ESG, or environment, social, and governance goals. And that's the other connecting, I guess, connector between people who've been doing this work for a very long time and those stakeholders in companies that are looking for investment opportunities. So bridging those things and making sure that you also have leadership that will support and model change behavior is beyond critical.
This conversation is amazing, and I wish it wasn't ending. We have just a few more minutes. I would love to know from those who would like to share, if you were going to start in one space. I know what we were talking about, it's a multi-branched approach in all organizations at different levels. But if you're going to start one space today, what would you start with in your organization to make it, to transform it in the way we need it to be transformed, as we can see from the world around us?
I think I'd want to make sure that all of our employees were seen and heard as human beings, and make sure that the walk that they are walking, I've said this before, that the world is unfair. So we need to create a fair and equal space in Covestro, because it may be the only place some people experience that kind of equity and fairness during their 24 hours. So I would definitely start with our people, not only being a focus, but a priority all the time.
As it relates to racism, I have to say the biggest challenge that we have as an organization is that people have been trained for decades not to talk about race at work. And frankly, a lot of our energy is spent just trying to unravel that very complicated challenge and just creating environments where people can open up and start to let the conversation in.
Yeah, and yeah, I think for me it'd be the intentionality, which I think everyone on this panel has displayed. And so ensuring that at the highest of levels in the company, a determination is made that the company will be intentional about ensuring that the company will have a strong sense of belonging, inclusiveness, and will be diverse. And from that, everything else can follow. But I think that especially today, I think that customers, communities, internal stakeholders, meaning the talent and potential talent that you hope to attract, I think that they expect to see a degree of intentionality in terms of the initiatives that you eventually will help ensure that you do have that diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace.
And I would tag on what Jeremy said, really a growth mindset. I think that this idea that we've always kind of done it this way shape shifts, and it leads conversations, and people will say, well, this is what I know. And they're really saying we've always done it this way. So I would start with the idea of just saying that we're going to become a learning culture. We're going to have a growth mindset. And where does that start? It starts with having some things that are pretty frequent or ongoing that are allowing us the opportunity to learn, reflect, discuss, ask good questions, because we have to go through this process of unlearning and relearning things that might be uncomfortable and tied into values of people.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughts, for your expertise, for your time. We are 1 minute over, so I'm going to hand it over to Gina very quickly. Thank you, everyone.
Can't thank you enough, Laura, and all the outstanding presenters for this really very honest, transparent, and very valuable practical conversation. So thank you all. In closing, just want to thank you all for being with us. Thank you for all the people in the audience who joined us today. We want to once again thank our sponsors for helping to make this possible, UPMC Health Plan, Covestra LLC, and the Pittsburgh Pirates. And finally, please visit sustainablepittsburgh.org and vibrantpittsburgh.org for more of these resources. Consider joining or becoming a donor to support our work, and we look forward to working with you going on and seeing you at future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.